We're live.
Are we?
Sorry, somebody always has to say that when we're live on YouTube.
Okay, it hasn't come out yet. It will.
Well, it says meeting is now streaming live on YouTube, so.
Yay.
Oh, now be careful. Everything we say is live.
Yes, exactly.
It'll go down in our permanent record.
Now we have to be proper.
Oh, that's gonna be hard for me.
Right.
You know, the first step to solving a problem is admitting you have one, so.
There we go. Well, I you know what? I cannot count how many points I have, so. I have a lot, probably.
Very good.
Beer problem, that's the first one.
So you guys let me know when you're ready and we can kick it off.
I'm ready when you are.
Good.
Vamos, Cos.
Should we just kick it? All
Let's
right.
do it.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone out there. Welcome to this exciting conversation we have programmed for you today on how to deal with the mental stress and stressors of a lockdown. Just one little comment. Please feel free to leave your comments and questions on the chat box so I can collect them and pass them to our panel here. So we have a fun conversation already programmed for you. So if maybe we'll have some time for questions at the end. But without further ado, I would like to introduce Claudia Bauer. She's a writer and critic for the San Francisco Chronicle, Dance Magazine, Point Magazine, DanceTabs.com, and more. She is based in the San Francisco Bay Area and covers dance internationally. Claudia, would you like to introduce the rest of our guests today?
I do. Today we have with us worldwide ballet class accompanist and Cincinnati ballet soloist David Morse. We have Kathleen Dahlhoff. Oh, hello, David. We have Kathleen Dahlhoff, who recently retired from Cincinnati Ballet to pursue a PhD in psychology. And we have Josh Spell, who danced with Pacific Northwest Ballet for 10 years and is now a licensed social worker in Seattle. And he is the consulting therapist for PNB School. So Josh, we're going to start with you. We are now many months into this situation, and I think all of our feelings have evolved over time. And I'd like to know what you've been hearing recently from dancers and whether their feelings have changed since earlier on in the pandemic.
Yeah, I think that what we're still hearing a lot about is this unknown, right? Not knowing what things are going to look like returning to another season, kind of with these different parameters, and also not knowing what it's going to be like to come back into the studio and if I'll be able to get in shape. And so it's kind of become more of this all or nothing mentality that in the beginning it was around, I'm going to get out of shape. Whereas now it's, can I ever get back into shape in the way that maybe I once was? So, you know, there's a lot of feelings that come up around that, and being able to kind of break that down is something that we've been talking a lot about. I think another thing that's new is this idea of finding our voice as dancers. And so amidst a pandemic, right, we had this whole uprising with the Black Lives Matters movement. And I think that that has really sort of decolonized some of the ballet world or the dance world in general. And so now it's also kind of, how do I come back in and sort of ask for what I need? In terms of like, first day back, we're gonna run this variation or something like that. And maybe your body is not really equipped to do that. So it's kind of this question, can I say that? Like, is that okay now? So yeah, there are definitely variations than when we were here in March.
Yeah. And what about the impact of all of that uncertainty? We really don't know how long this is going to go. And while we may think right now, well, in the fitness that I'm at now, what could I do? But if this goes on for 3 or 4 months, where will I be then? You know,
Right.
there's so much uncertainty to sort of be present with.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that what we have to remember is each day is different, right? So kind of like the shape that you're returning to the studio is probably going to look different from day to day. And so when we're thinking, again, back to that all or nothing, like I have to be in this type of shape. And when I'm talking about all or nothing, I think for dancers, something that we kind of fall into is perfectionism. So that would be an example of this all or nothing thinking. So if you're trying to get back into shape and you're saying, I have to be at this level of sort of performance, which is the way I was in season when I'm taking class and rehearsing, and just have these expectations for your body, then of course it's going to lead to more of that feeling of this is never going to happen. So what we can make certain are things like, I'm going to take ballet class today, right? Or I'm going to do these exercises that maybe can help to strengthen some of the muscles that I haven't used in a while. I'm going to plan to, you know, spend a little bit of time doing cross training, or, right, like picking things that you can do. So there isn't just this unknown of, oh my gosh, where am I going to be in 3 months?
Right.
Choose some things that maybe you do have some choice in.
Yeah. Can we revisit the decolonized point that you made? Kent would like some clarification on that. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, and I think that kind of opens up a lot for a discussion just around like how the ballet world was formed. You know, like just kind of it's done in the French courts, right? For royalty. There are these expectations that started a long time ago with, I think it's what, Louis the 14th? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so when we're looking at today, that's very different in terms of what ballet looks like. So when I say decolonize, it's kind of challenging sort of the origins and allowing for diversity in body and skin, in management, in communication, how we use our voice, right? So it's very different. So it's kind of just making space to challenge maybe older existing ways of thinking.
Yeah, well, that's, I think we could do a whole seminar just on that topic another day. So what about those feelings of anxiety and uncertainty? And, you know, David, you brought up things like that about some of the issues some really heavy issues that you've been dealing with during this time.
Yeah, so it's been really great to be Cincinnati Ballet. We're a member of AGMAS, and I'm our AGMA delegate. So it's been great to kind of be able to kind of have that community and those conversations, just to kind of hear what other folks are going through. And we were just talking about this in class a little bit, but it is, while it can feel isolating, being isolated at home, not being able to go in the studio and stuff like that, it's really reassuring to hear that like everyone is going through not exactly the same thing, but we're all going through a lot of the same things. And yeah, Josh touched on some great points too that we've been talking about a lot with, you know, just trying to be realistic about what we can come back to. Luckily here in Cincinnati, we've had like amazing conversations, like really, really great communication between us and the artistic staff about, you know, they get it. And leadership in ballet companies, I think at this time, they have to get it. They have to understand that no one has ever been, I mean, not no one, but it's so few of us have been off for this long with no access to a studio, no access to point shoes. You know, there's just so many things that we can't do right now. So it's been great. You know, some of us have, you know, it's so awkward to say to your boss, like, I don't know if I could come back to X, Y, and Z, but to be able to have those conversations and have them realistically has been, I feel lucky. I hope that folks around the world and in other companies, you know, are having that same experience. And if you are, you know, in AGMA, I think, you know, folks at AGMA really get that. And even Dance USA put out a whole set of guidelines saying that, you know, after being off for such a prolonged period, you know, you need to take it easy. You need to take, I think the Dance USA guidelines said 8 to 12 weeks of like really like allowing yourself to get back into it. And I know we spoke about this last week, but another part that Josh kind of touched on that has been a little tough for me is, if you we're so, as much as we try to be like process driven creatures where we like, invest in the moment and all of that, it's very difficult to never have that culmination, to be away from that like performance moment that we all yearn for. So it's very difficult when you see, another thing has been canceled or another date has been, pushed further out. That kind of idea of trying to keep yourself in some kind of shape. I know that's tricky, and things that are normally so concrete for us, like calendars, contracts, signing things, all of that, they're becoming fluid now. Things that you think you can make it back for such and such a date, but then the numbers in your state go up, or we're shooting for this performance, or it's just it can be uncertain. And I think that's not a statement one way or the other, but that's just a reality right now, that I think that's okay. That's it's all right. Yeah, Claudia.
Well, I was just going to say that, in the history of the world, pandemics and illnesses have had such a profound influence on shaping the course of human history. And I think we're all starting to come to grips with the fact that this might be one of those moments. And for me, that's really become an existential, like, that's a lot to process. At the beginning, it was like, oh, we can sort of like get this under control. And now it's like, well, this is just too gigantic. This is actually going to change the way we do things. And in some ways, like you're saying, there's going to be, or like we've talked about, there's some things that we're going to take from this that are going to be really positive. But I think for me, not knowing what the horizon is, just mentally, not just being in shape, but just emotionally, like, where is my life going in general?
Yeah, I mean, it's, people are talking about this, like, teachers we were hearing stories of teachers like writing wills and things like that, last month, when they're prepping to go back to school. And now, like, I'm getting messages from friends like, okay, if we're going to be talking about going back into the studio with a new virus that you don't know how it's going to affect you, some people come out okay, some people it can be obviously it's fatal, or it can have long-term effects. So that, I think that's a point of stress for us, because there's a little bit of pull of kind of guilt of like, I love what I do and I love my craft and I want to get into it as much as I possibly can. But then there's also this fear of not knowing how that could have like a really, really serious effect on your life. And then for me, but it does, as much passion and love as we all have for what we do. It's like not a question here. We all are obviously passionate about what we do. It does make you think a little bit, like, it makes you feel less essential, because you're like, people could probably get along with their lives without ballet just fine, and I would not be putting myself at any risk. It puts you in that kind of mindset. And I flip-flop. I go back and forth between that and then the other aspect of like, no, the arts are like what define us as humanity. That's what survives, centuries. Those are the things that we look back on as the art forms that cultures leave behind. So that's been tough to get messages from folks saying like, hey, should I up my life insurance? Do you have a will? Does AGMA offer legal services to help me write one? That everybody should probably have a will anyway, but it's just tough to be getting those kind of texts, around this time.
Yeah, there's a qualitative difference between knowing that we should all have a will and a plan and feeling like I could need it soon. It's like a really different aspect to that. Another aspect is seeing people on Zoom and the different access people have to studios. If you talk about maintaining your technique and getting into shape, and Jill just brought this up, that as she says, as a dance professor, the mental anxiety around seeing some people in the studios and others unable to be there is hard to watch. And I'm sure it's hard for the dancers who don't have access to those facilities as well. Some people seem to be, she says, some people seem to be progressing while others are having a harder time with that. So this is for everybody really, what would you say if you can relate to that? Or Josh, what have you been hearing?
Yeah, I think that is the reality of the situation, that we all have different access to what's going on, and that can really bring out that sort of competition aspect, right? Like some people are going to do more than I am doing, or I'm falling behind. And again, I think that it's helpful kind of just to pause and look at this situation as not sort of this permanent, like end all be all situation, right? Where, yes, that's true. That's the reality of what's happening for some, but it's not always going to be like this, right? And so kind of when we get stuck in that place, again, like I'm never going to get back into a studio, it just sort of exacerbates that feeling of competition. And so there's this idea of pain plus resistance equals suffering. And I think that this is a good place to sort of introduce that, because the reality is some people don't have a space. Some people are in apartments. Some people take class and do a grand battement and literally like hit their counter, or right, like it's the reality of what's happening. And some people have a garage, or some people have a more accessible space. So if that difference is really just being focused on, then we're causing even more sort of resistance to what already is, right? The reality is you're not in a studio, and that really sucks. And, you know, I think that I don't want to veer off the point, but I just want to sort of kind of just highlight what David was saying about like some of these situations about finding a will, doing things that are in your control, right? Like that is a way of making sense of a situation, right? Like taking control of a situation. And so I think even with this idea of not being able to have the same classes or the same resources that are there, if we're accepting, right, and seeing what we can do, then in the end, there's less of that sort of suffering that's going on.
I think it's also important to recognize that there's more to a dancer than technical progress. I recently interviewed several people on this topic, school directors and company directors, and every single one has said, yes, they see, you know, they can see on Zoom, some people have more ability to get into a studio and they can keep their technique at a higher level. But what they see in people who don't have that is a resilience and a dedication and a willingness to keep showing up and to grow in other ways that they really truly value. So while yes, it is important to maintain and to grow technically, every single person that I've spoken to has not said that limited, you know, they understand the physical limitations and that they're looking for more than that in a dancer. So
I love that you bring that out.
What's that?
I love that you bring that out, Claudia, because it's so true, right? Like just because it's this stereotypical way of taking class, that's not there, right? There are other things that you're focusing on. So thanks for highlighting that.
Yeah, go ahead, Kathleen.
Yeah, so I kind of want to go off a little bit of what David was saying, where, you know, our passion for this art form is not in question. And I feel like in this particular situation, we kind of have a magnifying glass on things like Zoom and social media, where that's our connection to our fellow dancers. And so with that comes the extreme comparisons of what you're doing to the best of what these other people are doing, what they want to show. So it's like, you know, you see these people who have built studios in their own homes, and you think to yourself, oh, I must not love ballet enough, or I haven't worked hard enough to, you know, if I wanted to come back badly enough, I would have built my own studio, I would have done this. And going off of what Josh said about the competition aspect of it, we are generally, we try to say that we are competitive with ourselves because that sounds nicer, but ultimately most dancers, if not all, are perfectionists. And one way to gauge your progress is by looking at other people. And I think that right now, because of the limitations we have in terms of our communication, in terms of what we actually have access to with our eyes, is kind of difficult right now. And I think a lot of people are really calling into question, like, do I love this enough? Am I good enough? Am I, you know, and it's really hard to see, because yes, I have said to many, many people over the years when they've asked me, oh, you must, like, do you love your job? Do you love to dance? And it's like, yes, if I didn't, I would not be able to do this. And that's something I kind of also want to remind a lot of dancers out there who are feeling, you know, like people will think they're not doing enough. It's like, if you are a dancer, it means you love it. Like if you're a dancer at the level of, you know, an AGMA company, a professional dancer, a professional school, like you have, like the passion for it is fundamental. So no one is calling that into question. And I think that's something that people should remind themselves of in these situations. Mm-hmm. Just because they're not building, you know, a whole ballet studio from a deck in their backyard doesn't mean that their dedication is being called into question.
I think it's important not to underestimate just how hard this whole situation is. And to your point about perfectionism, that if people are struggling to deal with it on any level, if you have perfectionist tendencies, you're going to probably criticize yourself for that. You're going to feel like, oh, I'm weak, or I should know how to do this. And the fact is, this is actually really hard. And not very many people know how to do this. And to sustain it, to sustain any sort of, you know, composure over such a long and demanding period of time is challenging, you know, and to have compassion for yourself.
Yeah, not to play up the silver lining point too much, but like Josh kind of touched on it, but also to the same point, it's like to be able to manage those things that you do have in your control, whether it's like, I can make a will, or that's like kind of the other side of it. But even just like in terms of your training, I saw something on an Instagram, somebody posted like that during the quarantine, like they kind of tried to really just focus on developing their arabesque. It was like something they weren't super confident about. So they just sort of, that was kind of their project. And he's, I can't remember who it was, but he said that kind of having like one or maybe a small handful of things to really focus on and devote this time to has been helpful, because there is that kind of sense of progress about it. I mean, in arabesque, it's like you can do a before and after picture. You know, you can do photos each day and see the leg, you know, going up a little bit, or I don't know. And it's been, not to plug Worldwide Ballet Class too much right here on Worldwide Ballet Class, but it's been great too to see these teachers really acknowledging the limitations and helping people find the things that you can work on. Like, yeah, none of us are doing double cabriole right now. None of us are doing grand pirouettes right. Well, some people are, but you know, there's a lot of restrictions on what you can and can't do. But it's been cool for me, like playing class every day and seeing all the teachers and everything, but seeing folks focus on the smaller aspects of the technique, the more like detailed things, those things that teachers always tell us are the things that make a great dancer. Like those kind of seem like the things that it's like an opportune time to work on, all those little in-betweens, all those little details. And yeah, it becomes a little monotonous, like when that's the only thing you're focused on and you're not able to like do the huge stuff. But I think there's cool value in being able to find those elements that online platforms like this are really offering people. I mean, it's been cool for me to just like, you know, hone in on those kind of items to progress with.
Yeah, David, I think it's really helpful. Oh, go ahead, Kathleen.
No, I was just I taught in a studio for the first time yesterday, and 4 of my students were on Zoom, but then the other 6 were in the studio with me. And it was really interesting because, just going off of what David was saying about the little things that you can focus on, it was amazing to be able to teach a class for people, you know, in their bedrooms in a studio, if that makes sense. Like, it was totally natural to, you know, help them focus on staying on their leg, not like shifting their weight off into, you know, their dining chair. Like, it, while we do feel confined, these are things that we would want to focus on in the studio anyways. And so maybe emphasizing that is helpful. And to your point about a silver lining, beneficial even.
Yeah, I hate to put too Pollyanna a spin on it, you know, but there is something about, yes, we have all these opportunities and we feel really mad at the same time. So it's like this complicated emotional sort of soup. And I think, Also to Jill's point, and then tying back to you, Kathleen, retiring at this time, I think that a lot of people feel grief because they do, like Jill's saying, they do see other people progressing or other people having opportunities, or they feel the opportunities that they're not getting right now. They can't perform, or they can't graduate, or like Kathleen, they retire and they can't share that with people. So there are these missed moments. So how can you cope with that?
Oh, I mean, I'll try not to cry, but like my final performance, and I was super lucky to, somebody took a film. They just happened to come to that last show that I did in Swan Lake where I was the queen mother, and they happened to film like my final bow, and that's like a really special thing to me. But I was injured at the time. I was so excited to come back for the next two programs and actually dance. And actually, there were at least two bucket list ballets that we were supposed to do. We were supposed to do -16, which is a ballet that I've seen many times, both Alvin Ailey and NDT. I've seen both of them do it. And so I was so excited to do that. And also Val Caniparoli's Ibsen's House. I saw it premiered at the New Works Festival in San Francisco, however many years ago that was. And I've always wanted to dance it. I studied Ibsen in college on a whim. And so to have come, the week before we were supposed to head to the theater, like literally was one of our last rehearsals in the studio. That was my last rehearsal ever. Mm-hmm. And that has been so hard and also to have, we were originally supposed to come back on June 15th and we were going to perform on July 28th or something and have it be like a culmination of two separate programs. And so for those first several months of us in quarantine, I had no idea whether I was going to even have, like, it was unsure whether or not I was going to have a final performance. And as it is right now, I mean, I obviously will not, but it's been very, very difficult. It's also, it puts things into perspective in terms of, it's kind of small potatoes that I didn't get a final performance with people around the world dying and everything. And so sometimes I feel a little bit, angry at myself for being sad about it, and feeling like I was gypped in some way and feeling angry about it. But I think it's, it's something that I have done professionally for over a decade, and it's something that I loved with everything in me. And I think it's for those people who have also retired, it's okay to be upset about it. It's okay to be angry and still that your feelings are valid, essentially. I don't know. It's all still very upsetting for me. And I am super, super lucky to have my health, and I'm super, super excited to be continuing in the dance field in a totally different way, both as a teacher and as a dance therapist eventually. And so at least I get to, still have my finger on the pulse of the ballet world. So that's what I try to remind myself.
Claudia, if it's okay to jump in there, Kathleen, I think what you really highlighted was this sort of dissonance that a lot of people are experiencing, right, with these conflicting emotions, where there are these sort of like just levels of pain and suffering that are going on. And so trying to make sense of that with feeling like the reality of what you're going through, right? Like, yes, it is really difficult to retire without any sort of feeling of control in that, and feeling like there's so much that you're looking forward to, and then that's sort of taken away. right? And then looking at sort of this zooming out perspective of, yes, people are dying, right? And so I think that that is what is so difficult right now, are those conflicting sort of like emotions, but also just beliefs about what's going on. And so like with the grief framework that Claudia mentioned, there are so many emotions in that really to look at. And so when you're able to acknowledge that, yeah, I'm sad, and then I'm really angry also, and this doesn't make sense. I can't make sense of what's happening in the world, but I also can't make sense of what's happening for me. And really being able to just say, and the reality is this is happening, right? I am feeling this way, and the world is existing in this way, right? So it gives everyone a chance to actually say, like, this is the emotion that I am experiencing. And that's kind of one of those tenets of self-compassion, right? Being mindful of our emotions, making space for our emotions and our experiences.
Absolutely. And just to piggyback off of that a little bit, you had mentioned the Black Lives Matter movement and how that, especially in the ballet community, there has for a very long time been an incredibly Eurocentric look. And so going away from ballet and being really, really upset and angry about all of this, and then having, you know, the ballet world get put under this magnifying glass where it's like putting all of these big companies in the spotlight with, you haven't done enough for inclusivity, you haven't done this, you haven't done that. And I personally have been so, for a long time, I left ballet for a couple of years and was dancing with the professional division at Alvin Ailey. And these people who are being discriminated against are my family, they're my people. And so being so angry with ballet from that side of it, but also missing it terribly, is another thing that I think has been really hard. And I think a lot of people who just not even necessarily are retiring right now, but who have, you know, like David, been off for 5 months, and you miss it terribly. But at the same time, there's that uncertainty where it's like, you can't idolize it, really. You can't, there's so much work to be done. And understanding that and the fear that comes with that is something that for me was very, very overwhelming in the midst of all of this. And so, I mean, David, because you're going back to a company in the Midwest where you guys, not a lot of people of color in the company. Sorry, Claudia, I just curious.
Yeah, I mean,
David,
been,
go ahead and respond.
It's been a big topic. I mean, it's something that we've been having to have some tough conversations around. I don't know exactly, what all we're going to be doing moving forward, but yeah, it is something that all companies are having to kind of reckon with right now. And I think there's a lot of unknown about, like, okay, how do we take this framework of a ballet company that is such a specific model that everybody knows the business model, everybody knows how it works, everybody knows the look, everybody knows, it's so familiar, all of it, even though it's flawed, but familiar. And I think the companies are just working through a way to find out. I mean, I can't give you specifics right now, but it's, I'm like huge Bon Appetit fan. I don't know if any of you guys are, but just like kind of similar idea of all that they're going through too with Condé Nast, and like, but it's interesting the kind of dichotomy of going through all of that during this crazy pandemic and this period of isolation, but like also sort of the hope that almost we needed this space away from one another to help deal with this problem, and I'm hoping that when we kind of get back into something like feeling more like a new normal, that some of that stuff can be revamped. I don't know. That's the optimist in me.
Well, hopefully this experience will generate a lot more mutual support in the ballet community. We've now all gone through something together, as opposed to feeling like, well, that is somebody else's problem and I need to focus on my career and I don't have to worry about that. So maybe that's one of the upsides of this. You know, I think there'll be a lot of new ideas and a lot of new ways of running companies and including people. And I think also the online act is going to bring access to a lot of people that didn't previously have it. So I want to go back to something Kathleen mentioned in a previous discussion we had, which was body image issues and eating issues. And Josh, this is a specialty of yours. So, you know, what have you been hearing about that? Because I think that just ties so directly into not being able to be in shape and exert yourself, you know, as normal.
Yeah, I think that, again, it's for dancers, we have this routine, we have this expectation for ourselves, but also it's part of the culture, right? Is that we're going to be in shape, we're going to look a certain way. And when that starts to slip, that's when there is fear of my body is changing. Am I going to need to take some sort of action by, you know, upping exercise or by sort of manipulating my diet, things like that. And so it's a reality of what goes on in an aesthetic sport, right? I mean, that we can't get away from that. And so what I have really talked to a lot of dancers about is just first being able to recognize that that's the expectation. But the next is like, how do we interact with our body like we would in an interpersonal relationship, right? So like with your partner, are you always like harmonious? Do you always like enjoy every single thing that's happening in that relationship? I mean, just think of any relationship. It can be platonic relationships. And so kind of just saying like, some days I am not happy with my body, you know, and even for me not being a dancer, it's something that's really helpful because sometimes you just don't feel like you did when you were in the studio. But it also makes room for things like respect, for curiosity, to say like, what is contributing to this? And I think, again, I talk about perspective. So zooming out a little bit, right? If you have a mirror and you're taking class and you have all of this dissatisfaction, is it really about your body? Or is it feeling like I don't have control with having a choice to be in the studio? You know, like I am feeling a lot of grief. And so now I'm turning it towards my body versus actually dealing with the emotion of what's coming up. And so those are just some things that can really be helpful in just kind of jump starting that. And I like the relationship piece because it's so full and comprehensive, right? So being able to look at things like respect and body respect for yourself, but also making space for just a diversity of emotions. So that opens up more space for your body. And then the other thing that's really big is body trust. So how many pliés, how many tendus have dancers done in their dance career or dance life? So there is an element of your body is actually going to respond to the time that you have put into the studio. Even though you're out of the studio right now, like ballet is about repetition. And from a scientific standpoint, muscle memory is a real thing. So it's almost trusting that, okay, just because my body doesn't look the way that I want it to, or maybe not, it's not even about aesthetics. Maybe it's just not responding. My muscles are not as strong, right? Or, you know, something like that. But remembering that as a dancer, we have honed our craft over and over. So making space for that as well, I think just gives that perspective.
Mm-hmm. I think that's something that teachers need to remind their students of, especially, and going back to Jill again as a dance professor, is to really help students create space for that, and just to acknowledge, they might not even be aware that they're feeling that, but to say, hey, this is something that, you know, people are talking about or that I've been feeling, and just to make that, you know, be the first to open that topic and at least plant the seed in people's minds. Someone else has just commented, he says that he's suffering from depression and that watching people share their art in class has actually really been helping. And I'm sure that all of us are going through some, you know, depression, and to feel connected like this, I mean, that's what we're trying to do with this, is to sort of combat that in a way, or at least make space to acknowledge what we're all feeling. So what are other ways that people can do that during this time? Again, not feeling like a Pollyanna, but just to say, hey, this is where I'm at right now.
Right. So I think that really gets at this idea of common humanity. Again, another aspect of self-compassion. And so I just want to say self-compassion overall, but that just feels like this sometimes ominous kind of aspect. But what I think is really helpful in the feelings of hopelessness or worthlessness, right, is kind of being able to just feel a sense of your own accomplishment, whatever that means, right? So I think that earlier David was talking about like taking a picture of someone in an arabesque, like you can see this definitive like work that's going on. But I think we can take that back even further, like going to class one day, or doing something that feels like it's helpful for you, versus turning on social media and then comparing to what everyone else is doing and feeling like you're not doing enough. So really breaking it down into measurable things for you that have a little bit more just meaning, right? And so I think little things, we always are looking at these big things of achievement, but also just stepping back and saying, you know, like I went for a walk today, or, you know, I got up and I made myself a really nice breakfast. I reached out to someone. I came and enjoyed these ballet classes together, right? So kind of going opposite to that feeling, because back to the common humanity, I know if I felt this urge to isolate, I have felt, you know, just this need to kind of just say like, what is happening? And so that's okay for a little while, but if we keep in that isolation, that's when those thoughts really just sort of like, they go haywire. So being able to come into a common space, that really helps kind of isolation, because a lot of things like depression, eating disorders, many mental disorders thrive in secrecy. They thrive being sort of internal and not being shared with others. So being able to just recognize that maybe the depression wants you to stay inside, literally and figuratively, inside your mind, and then being able to just say, okay, this is another way though. I can enjoy worldwide ballet class. I can come and I can talk on a forum. I can reach out.
Yeah, I love how you talk about sort of like the incremental approach of just like, you know, if I can just get a walk in or do like, you know, something small like that. And I think also weirdly for me, something that has been strange is this feeling that like, yes, we're off, a lot of people, but there's been this weird sense of kind of busyness of like, you know, you're trying to keep up with this, you know, you're trying to keep up with friends and family, you've got side projects you're working on, you're trying to keep up with email and stuff like that. And then the like kind of you aspect of it ends up taking a back seat. and then the class or the yoga or the Pilates or all those conditioning things that we're so used to and that are part of our normal thing kind of just become like things you feel like you have to squeeze in your schedule. And I was just reflecting last night, like I was doing class, but I felt very good. I was able to have like a real strong like mind body connection. Like I was really in it. I was really focused in the moment. And it was nice, like, and we lose that too when we're working too. It's not just being off now, you're not fully in it every single class that you take, but I don't know. I'm going to try to kind of push for more of that going forward too, whether it's, just like really being in it when you go for a walk around the lake or if it's class or whatever the thing is that you're able to devote some time to, making it like giving it as much value as you can, because, days have gotten so weirdly crazy and busy. So that those moments can be like real true mind body, like, because I ultimately feel like I get more progress out of that, like it's more valuable that way.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Kathleen.
Oh, I was just gonna say, since we are, in this lockdown situation, we kind of want to project outwards. There's this whole feeling of needing to escape. And I think that for me, that's where like a lot of the anxiety and depression that I experience comes from, is this like need to escape, but also being scared to escape. And I think that what David was saying is a really super helpful way to, stay present and find the not like the meaning of the small things, but like finding the enjoyment within your own life as opposed to trying to find it outside of your situation, creating it for yourself and creating a space and environment. So even outside of this pandemic, perhaps it's something where you can just be more present in your body, in your mind when you're dancing. So.
Well, Josh, I think what they're both touching on is the idea of reframing, right? And we don't have an opportunity to do things the way we want to do them, but what can we do now that we can reframe as something that actually is good, like giving credit for going out for a walk or going, and what did I experience there that I actually don't have the opportunity to experience when I'm super busy and always out and never have any downtime. And that's, I think, a very powerful tool in a situation like this. And I'd love to hear you go into that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's reframing, and it's also sort of gratitude. That's another thing to kind of remember, like taking in what you have in front of you and being appreciative for the things that you get to do. But I think with this reframing piece, it's sort of looking at everything that's going on in our world, a pandemic, sort of uprising, all of these things as opportunities for growth, right? Opportunities for learning. And I want to be careful about that word growth, because I think with dancers, it becomes like, okay, I have to then find these other things and accomplish these other things. And so maybe kind of the idea of opportunities for learning, right? So you can get more in touch with what are your values, what are important to you that will not only in this time help you thrive, but also when you get back into the studio. And so it's giving you that perspective really to say, like, this is not a waste of time, right? Like, this is part of, if you're still dancing, it's part of your career. If your career has ended, right? Like, this is just a step in that. Or if you're just a lay person, like I am, which is weird to say. But again, it's like looking at all these things that are going on as just ways to see another aspect of yourself, of your relationships, of your life, your relationship with your body. And I think that's what happens with reframing, is we can always look at the glass as half empty, but we also can look at it as half full also. And that sort of opens up this new way of being. And I think those small things like mindfulness, that's something that nothing can really take away. No one can take that away. No pandemic can take that away from you. And you get the opportunity to explore that for yourself. And mindfulness is not just meditation, right? Like that's one piece of it, but it's also just as I take ballet class, am I paying attention to my breath? Am I paying attention to this beautiful music that David is playing? Am I paying attention to the interaction of like many different people all over the world being together, right? Like you can find these little areas that really can open up space.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Maybe, I don't know if Josh, if you have any perspective on this or if anybody else wants to jump in, but for me, this is maybe part of the reason that it feels so tricky to be a dancer right now, because anybody in the performing arts, like if you use like sort of the like painter analogy, like painter is analogous to choreographer. Dancers are kind of more analogous to like paint. Like we're a little bit more the material in the creative process. So I think also maybe something that's like bogging dancers down at the moment is feeling like the only creative outlet that you have is the maintenance or maintaining your physicality and your ability to execute something that another creative person gives to you. Mm-hmm. So like other artists like sculptors, they keep sculpting as usual. Painters keep painting as usual. Writers keep writing as usual. But dancers, when we're in that position of being more like the medium, like we're interpreters, I guess, but we're a little bit closer to being the medium than the actual creative impetus. I think that's maybe a tough spot to be in when you're not, of course, people are doing side projects and things like that. But I wonder if Josh or if anybody, if you guys have perspective on like, that's just a little bit of a tough spot to be in as a creative person, but not the creator of the work that we do a lot of the time. I know some people are dancers and choreographers or whatever, but I don't know. I find that maybe that can be like a little bit of a kind of, it can make you feel a little stuck that way.
David, I don't know if you'll like this answer, but it makes me think of identity, right? And this is another area where, yes, you're right about like not being able to express your creativity as a dancer, but being able to look at the different hats that you wear that are not just dancer, right? Like, I think that this is what I see a lot with dancers who are struggling when they get injured or when they're getting ready to leave the ballet career or something like a pandemic, is all they have is their identity as a dancer. And so when we kind of use this image of like, you're holding balloons, and if you're only being held up by one balloon that is dancer, if something happens to that, you're probably going to just fall flat, right? Like there's not going to be anything else left of you. But if you have more there, like different interests that you have, different relationships maybe that you have, just different aspects of who you are as a person and individual, I think that there are other ways that you can express yourself and maybe find some of that creativity. And I think that goes back into what Claudia was saying with the reframing, is this is an opportunity, right, to explore just who you are, not in terms of achievement, but just in terms of who you get to be that will enhance your ability in the studio when you come back. This is all just about enhancing who you are as a dancer.
Can I just, you just said something and it reminded me of a phrase that we used a lot when I was at Ailey, where as a ballet dancer and going through like a professional school, I remember having my identity completely be centered around being a dancer. My interactions with my instructors and choreographers were all centered around being a dancer. Like if you got sick and you had to miss a class, it was like this horrible thing and you made yourself wrong and you felt like they were making you wrong for missing and all of this stuff. And it wasn't until I went to Ailey where their entire philosophy there was, you are a person first and then a dancer. And that like completely shifted who I was on stage, the way I approached, you know, injuries, the way I approached, you know, even acting on stage. And I think that that was just, I love what you basically said is exactly that. You are a person first and then you're a dancer, and remembering that part of it. So that just reminded me of that. So there you go.
Well, Josh, I think that goes to what you were saying about using this time to get in touch with your values. And I think ultimately, when we are all through this, perhaps we can't all see what's happening inside of ourselves now, and it feels very uncomfortable and distressing in many ways. But I think a lot of people will be surprised when they come out the other side of how much they have learned about themselves. And we can't really see it yet because we're just in our little bubbles. But once we're out in the world again, I think there'll be some new identities that we don't realize are getting stronger. So we have about 2 minutes left. Does anybody have anything that they'd like to add just to wrap up? Any message of hope?
I mean, I just want to say that having a forum like this is really hopeful for me as a dancer, but also working in the mental health field, because I think that being able to have conversations and talk openly about the challenges, about what you're actually going through, what you're experiencing, what feels hard, like that is part of just being able to accept, right? So kind of back to just saying like, this is the reality of where we are. And it doesn't have to just be sort of negative or just so heavy.
Great. Kathleen, anything you want to say to wrap up? A little positive message?
Just kind of going off of what Josh said, it's really, I'm super honored to have been part of this whole webinar. I know that last week when we had our discussion, our pre-panel discussion, I personally felt so much better just sometimes even mentioning something that you're struggling with, even if it's, you know, one sentence, just getting it out in the open is so helpful. And I'm so grateful that mental health and the mental health of dancers is now something that is, you know, starting to be talked about a little bit more, because these dancers are so incredibly perfectionistic, and they're the ones who it's such a specific career, and in my opinion it should be something where you're taking care of your mind as well as your body, and that mind body balance is so important. And it makes me so happy, as somebody who struggled a lot with an eating disorder when I was in school, struggled a lot with anxiety for the majority of my life, seeing this finally coming out and being okay is super, super helpful. So okay. I'm just grateful that this is a conversation we're even having.
Yeah, well then I guess finally I would just ask David, as an AGMA rep, you know, what value do you see in this type of conversation then? You know?
Yeah, I mean, these are the talks we all have to be having right now, because none of us in our lifetimes have ever been through something like this. And I think for those of you who are in AGMA companies, I think it's great, you know, that you've got that backing, because they're really, really advocating for everybody's safety, everybody's well-being going back, everybody's, you know, physical well-being, you know, just from the perspective of, you know, conditioning and stuff like that. And, you know, it's even for those who aren't involved in an AGMA company, I think just to have someone like that with like medical teams and folks like helping us set out guidelines for what our new normal will look like is so valuable. Like, so just rest assured, there's very capable people trying to work us through this in the best possible way we can. And I don't think anybody has a complete answer of what our profession and our world might look like after. but we're working on it. Like it's the wheels are turning and it's all in progress. So, you know, despite all the stress, rest assured that we'll get there. And love you guys.
Well, thank you so
Love
much.
you, David.
All right, thanks everybody so much. And thank you so much, Ruben and Diego, for creating this amazing platform.
It's our pleasure. That was great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Josh. That was super valuable. I hope
Thank you guys.
there are a lot of people out there.
Yep, and thanks to everybody who came.
Thank you so much for your contribution.
Thank you, Josh and Claudia.
Yeah,
Thank you
thanks,
so much
Josh.
for being
Amazing.
here.
Thanks so much.
All right, guys.
Catch you later.